I've been with the coroner's office for nearly 25 years, with 19 years as the coroner, and this is the worst case I've witnessed.
That is a coroner shaken by the story we're about to tell you. A former pastor who was also convicted of child sex crimes is now in jail accused of a horrific murder of a woman who was found encased in concrete under a shed. That is according to police, who also say that she was tortured before she died. We have the latest on this investigation and the lie that police say the suspect allegedly told that broke this case.
In our line of work, we see and witness many things, and this investigation is one you cannot unsee.
We're on the case, presented by Law&Crime. I'm Chris Stewart. Before we get to this story, let's talk a little true crime news. The Law&Crime docket is your one-stop shop for trending stories, thrilling body cams, and an exclusive look at brand new shows and podcasts from the faces that you love. Sign up for our docket newsletter by scanning the QR code that you see here, or click on the link in our description and the pinned comment right under this video. At the beginning of June, we'll pick 10 new docket subscribers and we'll send them a Law&Crime hat. Winners will be announced in the newsletter. Okay, let's get to this case, and you will quickly see why the coroner in Thurston County, Washington says it is the worst case he has seen in his decades on the job. This is the face of the man who police say is responsible. His name is Jeffrey Zizz. Zizz is facing charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping in the first degree, and unlawful disposal of human remains. And this is his alleged victim, 82-year-old Marcia Norman. She lived alone in Thurston County, Washington, and Zizz was her handyman. The last time anyone spoke with Marcia Norman was on April 1st. On April 4th, a couple days later, after Marcia hadn't been heard from, the local sheriff's office got a call from her family that she was missing. Her son said at 82 she was very coherent, and it wasn't like her to go missing. She had never done anything like this in the past. Deputies found her medication inside her home along this quiet road in a community south of Tacoma. April 1st. According to the planner that the medication was in, was the last time she had taken her meds. Deputies also found, by accessing her Apple ID, that she had plans to have dinner with someone on April 1st, and that someone was her handyman, Jeffrey Zizz. Zizz was already convicted of a heinous crime and had a humiliating fall from grace a couple years ago. Zizz used to be a pastor at a church in North Thurston, Washington. That church has scrubbed him from their social media, but he does still have an X account that he hasn't used since 2012, but he does have a handful of then tweets, and you can see he plays the part of a pastor talking about God. Like this one he puts out that says, quote, "What does the Lord require of you but to do justice and to love kindness and to walk humbly with your God?" And then he has this one which reads, quote, "Amazing grace, excellent wife, wonderful children, honorable profession, extraordinary neighbors. I almost feel guilty. Hashtag too much blessing for tweet." In 2022, Zizz pleaded guilty to charges including second-degree child molestation. His victims were between the ages of 12 and 14 and reportedly members of his family. Zizz reportedly only served 11 months in prison, though, because he was released under a law in Washington state called the Special Sex Offender Sentencing Alternative, meaning the court determines your level of risk to a community, and then you can be released on conditions into a treatment program instead of being behind bars in prison. One of Zizz's conditions was that he couldn't leave Washington state. This is a Law&Crime legal alert. Did you know that children are being diagnosed with serious conditions like type 2 diabetes and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease? And research is potentially linking ultra-processed foods to these outcomes. Our partners at Morgan & Morgan are stepping in to help. This is a law firm that has a lot of experience going up against big corporations, and they want to stand up for families who deserve justice and hold these food companies accountable. So if you know someone under the age of 21 who's been diagnosed with one of those conditions, like non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or type 2 diabetes, go to forthepeople.com/food. Also, you can scan the QR code on your screen. So now you have a little context on who Jeffrey Zizz is, and it is certainly concerning at this point for deputies and Marcia Norman's family that he was the last one to see her. According to court records, Marcia had struck up a friendship with Zizz. Now, it's unclear if she knew of his past, but she let him use a shed on her property to do odd jobs, but also store equipment. Deputies say when Marcia's family was asked about Zizz, they told them a story about a creepy interaction that Zizz had with this 82-year-old grandmother. Deputies say that Marcia's son told them one time his mom woke up in the middle of the night and Zizz was standing at the foot of her bed. Marcia then told Zizz to leave and they needed to keep a professional relationship. So you can see the red flags that are building up surrounding this handyman Jeffrey Zizz in this investigation. Deputies say when they went to interview Zizz at the place that he was renting, they noticed his red truck parked outside. Zizz allegedly told police that after having dinner at Marcia's house on April 1st, he went home around 9 p.m. and didn't leave until the next morning on April 2nd around 6 o'clock in the morning. That was a lie, according to deputies, because a camera system spotted Zizz's truck driving overnight at around 3 o'clock in the morning. Zizz allegedly admitted to that lie, but said he went back to Marcia's house to get equipment that he had left. Notably, for that trip though, his cell phone didn't show movement, as if he knew that that is something that deputies would look at in an investigation. Now, another part of Zizz's story was the Ring doorbell on the place where he lived. It did not show him leave. He didn't have an answer for that one, according to deputies, but when deputies then went to his bedroom, they noticed the window had a frame that was bent as if it had been removed by someone perhaps looking to get out of the window and not go through the front door where they would be caught on a Ring doorbell camera. At this point, Zizz continues to deny any involvement in Marcia Norman's disappearance, but then deputies get a search warrant and they made a shocking discovery. Here's the Thurston County Sheriff at a news conference, this video per KOMO TV.
On April 5th in the evening, Jeffrey's house and room were searched and items were seized, which included a 5-page letter which meticulously planned out a burglary and sexual assault of a woman who was referred to as his customer.
We have yet to see that 5-page document. Deputies haven't released it to the public. We do know during the course of the investigation that Zizz admitted to having romantic feelings for the 82-year-old Marcia Norman. On April 7th, 72 hours after detectives first responded to Marcia's home and nearly a week since anyone had heard from Marcia Norman, Jeffrey Zizz was named a person of interest in her death, and deputies say that he had fled Washington State, which violated the conditions of his child molestation conviction, so they put a warrant out for his arrest. His roommate told detectives that Zizz took his truck. While law enforcement looked for Zizz, they also traced his last known locations, and they were brought to a job site where Zizz was building a shed for someone who he had met through Marcia Norman. That person told law enforcement that Zizz started building a shed on April 2nd, a day since the last time anyone saw Marcia. Here's what the Thurston County Sheriff said they found next in this video per KOMO TV.
On April 9th, with the help of numerous entities, the Thurston County Sheriff's Office lifted up the shed with power equipment, and TCSO detectives began digging, and at that point in time, we located human remains about 18 inches underground in a shallow grave with concrete poured over the top.
An autopsy confirmed the body they found beneath that shed was Marcia Norman's. Deputies say her wrists and ankles were wrapped with long Velcro straps. They say that she was possibly bound before she died. Here's what the coroner said about her cause of death in that same news conference.
I take no pleasure in delivering the following message because it's going to sting. The immediate cause of death for Marcia is combined blunt force and penetrating sharp force injuries of the head. Other significant conditions contributing to Miss Norman's death were multiple blunt force injuries to her torso and extremities.
Zizz was eventually taken into custody in Missoula, Montana, which is a more than 8-hour drive from Marcia's house in Washington State. Here's KOMO's video of him facing a judge there. He was held on a warrant initially for leaving Washington State as a violation of his conditions related to that child sex crimes conviction. He's now back in Washington State, where he is charged with murder in the first degree, kidnapping in the first degree, and unlawful disposal of human remains, and he is being held without bond. The victim in this case, Marcia Norman, was someone who her family called their center. The Norman family released a statement saying, quote, "Marcia was the one that brought us together. We are thankful for the efforts of law enforcement, the Thurston County Sheriff's Office, and the Missoula Police Department in their handling of this matter. We are cooperating fully with the investigation in an effort to come to a resolution regarding the manner our family is grieving and looking for ways to honor her memory. Marcia was an engaged member of her community and family, full of life, with plans for the future. She is loved by many." As far as a motive for a case this horrific, officially it's unclear. But the Thurston County Sheriff said if he was to guess at this point, it's because Jeffrey Zizz, a former pastor turned child abuser, who many say was released with a light sentence for that crime, now an accused murderer, is a, quote, "violent person." Joining us now to talk more about this case is Professor of Forensics at Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan. Thank you, sir, for taking the time to be with us. This is a horrific case. And it was stunning to me where the local coroner in Thurston County, Washington, who'd been in the coroner's office for 25 years, said it was the worst thing he had ever seen. When you hear a coroner, and you know the job as well as anybody and what you see on a daily basis, but for a coroner to say that, what's your reaction when you hear that?
Well, it's one thing when you hear cops say things like that, but when you're using the measure of coroner and the things that they have been subjected to over the course of a very long career, by the way, 25 years, it kicks it up to another level. That means that what this individual saw at the scene, that, by the way, has to assess everything, take it all in, and remain as not emotional as possible, because you're trying to delve into the science. But it so struck this individual to the point where it's very assaulting. And I don't, you never recover from these sorts of things as a medical legal practitioner. Those things that hang in the back of your brain. And I think that this is probably going to be one of those cases, Chris.
And to look at the science of this, because it will be important. And you think of Marcia Norman, she was a grandmother, just so many things about her that people should be thinking about in this case, but the science will be important when this case goes to trial. And she was found underneath a shed, in some ways in concrete, and then there was a horrific discovery of what the cause of death was. How do you go about the autopsy process of gathering all that information?
Boy, it is very difficult. I was actually talking with a friend the other day about this case, and I've had experiences with what we refer to as encasement, and it happens one of two ways from a forensics perspective. You can chip away at the scene and try to remove the remains from, this encasement that they have, or you can get, something like a skid loader and dig out beneath this mass of concrete, which contains this poor woman's remains, and load it onto the back of a flatbed, cover it with a tarp, and drive it into the office. And then you take hammer and chisel and you knock away every bit of this. And the reason this is important, Chris, is the fact that with a case like this, as difficult as the concrete makes it to work the case, it also kind of cocoons the body, and it holds on to some of this trace evidence that's left behind. There's no telling what is in there, and it's painstaking. So where this concrete has seasoned on her body, remember, she was not encased in this concrete for for a protracted period of time. But the fact that she was, when you remove those chunks of concrete, you can actually take things away from the body. So you want to be in a controlled environment, like in the morgue, where you can catch everything that might come off the body. Another piece to this is going to be able to try to understand what we refer to as the PMI, the postmortem interval. And there's some literature out there to suggest that encasement like this can kind of retard that process to a certain degree. And timing is everything, as I know that you're well aware of. When did he make contact with her? When do we believe that he perpetrated this crime? Did he encase her at the scene? We can only assume that he did. And was there a lag between getting her in the ground and transporting her out there, that sort of thing. So to say that this case is complex would be an absolute understatement.
And part of it too, which is perhaps the most horrific part of this, and it's hard to find words to think about when the coroner was talking about the cause of death being two things, and it was blunt force trauma and then some sort of instrument, a sharp instrument in the head. I know there's probably a more scientific term for that, but how are you able to determine a cause of death being those two things?
Well, that's a great question. And one of the things that you're going to want to do with a body like this, and let me just step back just for a second, or drop back to this idea of encasement. You need to try to figure out a means to x-ray this before the concrete ever comes off of her. Okay, so that you can appreciate the body in its natural, pristine state in situ, which is just a fancy term that we use that means in place, because it contextualizes everything. So if she's got injuries to her head, I want to try to understand, first off, are these antemortem before death, or are they postmortem after death? Okay, so if they're postmortem, that means that if she's got blunt force trauma to the head, then there's not going to be any hemorrhage in that area. However, based upon what the coroner is saying, it sounds like these are antemortem injuries, because he's saying that this is a causative factor in her death. So therefore, you would have to have hemorrhage in that space in order to compromise her ability to survive. And the sharp force instrument is kind of interesting. As gruesome as this is, I had read through some of these documents, and they're referring to him being armed with a nail gun, Chris. Now, that would qualify as sharp force to a certain degree, and it's got more ballistic characteristics, obviously, than, say, if you're talking about a knife or a hatchet or something like that. But if it's a penetrating injury like this, and it's done as a result of driving a nail into someone's head, that's something that we would refer to under the classification of sharp force injury as a puncture wound. Okay, it's not the same as a bullet.
And knowing that, and again, it's incredibly gruesome, and
yes, it is.
Just to know that the cause of death was as terrible as deputies are saying and what the coroner is saying, but that science is important, because there's going to be a prosecutor who's going to try this case, and if Jeffrey Zizz did everything that the deputies say he did, like, this is someone you do not want to ever see the light of day ever again. How does the fact that, that science that the coroner's taking, how does that factor into this not just being a murder, but what was torture before this woman passed away?
Yeah, we're delving into the realm of sadism. Not Satanism, but sadism, when you get to this point. And I think one of the things relative to the physical assessment of her remains is going to be, how long did she linger? Okay, because there are cases that I've worked in, that I've covered in the media, where you will have literally individuals that are subjected to torture, where you can actually see at a cellular level, you can see the repair beginning to take place. Okay. Had this been something that was going on, how long did he torture her for a protracted period of time before he ever, committed the coup de grace, where he put her out of her misery, and then decides to, sequester her remains? That's going to be a big part to this, because this is so powerful, Chris. When you take this case before a jury, and you begin, and the coroner gets up on the stand, the forensic pathologist gets up on the stand, and they start talking about what she suffered through, that is going to send a chill up everybody's spine in this courtroom. And the thing about it is, it's illustrated. You've got pictures to go along with this. They're going to see her body encased in cement. They're going to see, after the cement has been cleared away, they're going to see these insults to her head that she sustained. And nobody, and particularly this woman, didn't deserve this, Chris.
No. No, and it's just you think of the preparation that you have for when this coroner is eventually going to be on a trial to make sure everything is laid out correctly
Yep.
for the jury. How specific can you get when you think about lingering? If you were to say that this was a woman who was tortured for multiple hours, or a shorter period of time, I mean, how specific can a coroner get in figuring that out?
Well, a lot of it is going to be dependent upon the assessment relative to viability. How viable was she at any one given time? So if you think about like the blunt force trauma of the head, okay, how much did she bleed into that area? Now, when they say blunt force trauma, to me, that means that there might be a chance that you've got an underlying hemorrhage in the brain, okay? Now, if you take that up to the next level, is there also a communicating fracture to the skull that kind of links to the underlying hemorrhage? Because you can have an insult to the head without fracturing the skull. So you're really walking a fine line here when you're trying to describe to a jury who, and I'm not being insulting by saying this, they don't have the same medical knowledge as a
No.
coroner / forensic pathologist. So you have to take this step by step. And, on an aside, that's the sign of an actual good witness. Because there are a lot of people I know that are very, very bright, but they're not worth a damn on the stand.
Sure.
If you can have somebody that can take these complex scientific constructs and break them down so that, your local carpenter or the dump truck driver or the lady that prepares the meals at school who's been called to go jury duty, they understand it. They understand it step by step, and that's the sign of a good expert witness on the stand.
I want to dive into that a little bit because obviously if you're testifying on behalf of the prosecution, you want a conviction in every case and make sure you deliver your point. But in this case, where it is so horrific, and if he is truly guilty of what deputies are saying, this is definitely someone that you don't want to mess this case up. What type of pressure is there when you do have, and it appears from deputies that you have him dead to rights at this point. There's a mountain of evidence saying that he's the person who did this. What type of pressure are you under as the coroner in preparing what your testimony is going to look like to make sure that you're communicating it properly to that person who, like myself, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not a doctor, but if I'm a juror sitting there, I'm just trying to understand what happened.
Stay right in the middle. Whatever you do, stick with the science, because science is that compass that will point us true north every single time. And it doesn't matter how much hyperbole either side, whether it's the prosecution or the defense attorney, throws out there, to kind of, create this kind of theatrical environment that happens in court many times. The facts, the science that the facts reveal here, trust me, are going to be enough. There's no reason to embroidery this in any way. If you're the person doing the scientific assessment, you sit there and you talk about what you observed. You talk about the measurements that you took, both at the scene and in the autopsy suite. And then you talk about the physiology of death. Because this is going to be a big question in this case. How long did it take her to die? And one more part to this is, did she suffer? Okay, because if, let's just say that there is trauma to the brain, did it impact an area of the brain where it would have rendered her unconscious? Okay. Now, if you have a forensic pathologist or a neuropathologist that gets up there and they talk about, no, she would have been awake and alert at this point in time. Well, that kicks it up to another level at that point in time because there's an awareness that goes on.
And then just lastly, I know you're not a psychologist or a profiler, but you have been involved in a lot of cases in involving people. Jeffrey Zizz may be at a completely different level with what he's being accused of, but when you see this manner of death, what does that say about the suspect in this case and the type of person you're dealing with if you're a prosecutor, coroner, detective, whoever it may be?
Well, I think it begs the question, what was the purpose in inflicting this much damage to another fellow human being? And that's a question that should be asked and answered, by the way. What is the purpose? This is not like as horrific as this is not like he took her out into the middle of a field and executed her with a gunshot wound to the head. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about, according to what the police have said, at his own hand, he inflicted this kind of trauma to this elderly woman. And so you can have an assessment, a forensic psychological assessment on him to paint the picture. Now, there's a real fine line that the prosecution is going to have to walk here. And let me just briefly break this down. I see this played out over and over again. It's almost as if the more horrific a crime is, there is at least from a perception standpoint, there's a possibility that you can say, well, this person is so mentally unstable. Obviously, and defense will argue this, obviously he had no idea what he was doing. It's an out-of-body experience. Who in their right mind, and that's key here, would ever do this to a fellow human being? Well, it would appear that Jeffrey Zizz did. And I got to tell you, man, this is not his first brush with the law. So
Right.
that goes back historically with this guy. This is just merely the crescendo, I think, in what has been horrible crimes that he has committed previously.
Yeah, he was convicted of sex crimes in 2022, pled guilty to those crimes, and certainly in this case is facing a mountain of evidence pointing him in the direction of just being responsible for just a horrific crime. Professor of Forensics at Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan. It's always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thank you for taking the time to be with us.
Thank you, Chris. Have a good day.
Zizz is next expected in court on April 6th. Deputies are still looking for information on this case. They put out a flyer looking for people who saw Zizz's red truck pulling a trailer at specific times around when deputies believe he allegedly killed Marcia Norman. For On the Case presented by Law and Crime, I'm Chris Stewart. We'll see you next time.